So we're here at the Agriculture location in Victoria. We're gonna go in and meet Ben, and he's gonna teach us how to take our coffee bean, grind it the right way, weigh it correctly to the water, use in what brew method, and get the right coffee extract, what kind of finished coffee product we're gonna get that's gonna be perfect for what you're looking for. So hopefully this will teach you how to choose a good bean, but then take that bean and make the perfect cup of coffee. So here we go, let's go inside and meet Ben.
Okay, we're going to talk about some brew fundamentals, and these are things that outside of espresso, for any kind of filter coffee, whether it's a French press or a pour over, anything in between, these are some fundamentals that work for everything. The biggest one is using weight versus volume. Invest in a good coffee scale that has at least 1 decimal point. And you want to be weighing all your ingredients. One of the main reasons for this is different shades of coffee will have different densities, so a volume measurement doesn't always equate. 1 cup or 1 scoop of 3 different coffees will give you 3 different weights. So if you really want to be able to dial in your strength, we always recommend a ratio of 17 water to 1 coffee. So for every gram of coffee, you want 17 grams of water. So, I just always have my phone calculator out if I'm brewing and it's a ratio I'm not super familiar with. I'll just quickly punch in, okay, I'm gonna do 25 grams of coffee on this, times 17, gives me the water weight that I need. And all of those weights will work themselves out as we're brewing, which you'll see right now. So some other fundamentals, preheating your brewing vessels is always a good idea, just so that they're not absorbing heat out of the water. Rinsing your paper filters, you'll often just get a bit of a papery flavor if you're using a dry filter, and that goes hand in hand with preheating, because you just use your hot water to rinse your filter, and then you're kind of killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're getting your preheat done, rinsing that filter out. So another fundamental thing to think about is if you're making adjustments because you're not happy with the result, whether the coffee's too strong or too weak, you've got a few different variables at play. Always adjust 1 variable. So you don't want to change your grind and change your water temperature. You want to know what that change did so that you can, fine tune your next brews. So if I find coffee's a little weak, my go-to is to adjust the grind. I keep the ratio the same, and I'll grind a bit finer if I want stronger coffee. I'll grind a bit coarser if I want less intense flavor in my coffee. So with those little tricks in hand, or those fundamentals, you can kind of apply those to any brew method. Quickly, we'll talk about grinders, because obviously we're grinding for any brew method. You definitely want a conical burr grinder as opposed to a blade grinder. Blade grinders are great for chopping up herbs and things like that, but not so much for coffee. Burr grinders, you get a consistent grind, consistent particle size, and they're adjustable so that you can tailor your grind to your brew method, because most brew methods you're going to want to really be able to fine tune. So we have a manual hand grinder here, and we have an electric grinder. The mechanics of the actual grinding are very similar. The difference is this one you're cranking, but you can do this off-grid. You can take it camping. I really like these ones actually, because if this ever breaks, it's glass, which is nice, but if it ever breaks, this is threaded to work with a mason jar. So nice little side thing. These are a little more finicky to adjust the grind. You take them apart, and you're actually turning a mechanism to move the burr further and the 2 burrs further and closer apart. Whereas this one, you're clicking it on a scale, and it's happening automatically. So for grind size, I find it's easy to relate it to sugar. So you have your really coarse sugar all the way to powdered sugar, and it's just a way of equating in your mind what you're looking for. So for a pour over, you want fairly fine, and so I would say that it's like similar to just a standard granular sugar, maybe slightly coarser. Whereas for French press, you almost want it to look like that Demerara little coffee packs where you can actually see the rubble, the individual grains. And then for espresso, it's almost like powdered sugar where you want it super fine. So just get used to what that looks like in your hand. You can kind of feel it, look at it, and then make little adjustments. And as I'm brewing, we'll talk about the speed that the water's flowing through, because that'll really give you an indicator of if you need to make grind adjustments or not. And then at the end, when you taste, we'll also give you some clues as to whether or not your grind is where you want it to be. So we're going to start with the V60. I'll use the cup that I'm going to drink out of to weigh the coffee, just so I'm not getting into a bunch of different unnecessary dirty dishes. So we'll brew 15 grams of coffee here. So getting back to what I was saying about weight versus volume, if I were to scoop this and then scoop a dark coffee, I'd have two completely different weights if the volume was exactly the same, which then you're kind of throwing your ratio out the window because you don't know the weight. So I'm just going to check the coarseness on this. We did a little pre-grind, and like I said, sort of similar to granular sugar. I'm pretty happy with that grind as a starting point for this brew method. So what we'll do is I've put my total weight that I want, and you'll notice there's no coffee kept in this hopper. You want the coffee kept in a bag fresh, and you just put your weight you want and you grind it all the way through, so you know you're getting the right weight all the time. Back to what we were talking about pre-wetting, and quickly I'll talk about the cone shape as well. This one comes to a point. You can see the filter comes to a point. The other style, we call it a Melita filter, just because that's the classic brand, and that's where you have a flat bottom. It comes to a point, but there's a flat section on the bottom, and the Melita filters will kind of look more like this. So that, just so you're aware, it's two different filter shapes. So in this case, I like to fold the seam back. Insert it. And then we're just gonna pour off. I'm not too concerned about what the scale's saying right now, because I'm just doing this for two reasons: preheating everything and wetting my filter. So I'll let it flow through. Get rid of that. Okay, so we're at 0 to start. Coffee goes in. I like to zero it and drop my coffee after it's ground, just to confirm that my weight is close to what I intended. So quick iPhone calculator, back to that ratio we discussed. So I'm going 15 times 17 says I want 255 grams of water. So a few things to remember. You want to initially wet all the grounds fairly evenly. And a few things you want to avoid. I'm going to do it just to show you what's wrong, but hitting the side really hard, you're basically just pushing the water past the coffee. So you always want to pour into the bed of coffee evenly. And now I'm just watching to get my weight, which was 255. Went a little over. It's not the end of the world. And then I like to give it one stir about 4 times around. That's a personal thing. I find the stir extracts really nicely. Other people don't do that. That's kind of where you get to play around and experiment with what you like. I find it just gives me a bit more of an even extraction. And when this is done dripping through, you'll see what I mean. Because you're going to get like a nice little even dome at the bottom, the way the coffee settles, as opposed to just a flat bed. And then here's where time can come into play. I didn't use it, but this skill has a built-in timer. And what you might want to do is start the timer as well on your flow through. And if you find that, it's taking 5 minutes to flow through, that's an indicator you probably need to coarsen your grind a little bit to speed things up. So you'll see how there's kind of an island in the middle now, and you get like a nice little proper dome, which for me, I don't know, it's an aesthetically pleasing thing and it's nice and consistent. So that's kind of my personal favorite pour over method. And then the stir also gets the coffee moving, and you avoid getting a ton of grounds that are high and dry. We've left a few on the side, but without the stir, you'll often see quite a bit of grounds that are high and dry, and that's just coffee that isn't getting extracted once it's out of the water. So just set this down where it won't make a mess. And so the reason I brewed this ratio was because I could tell that this cup is around a 250 ml cup. So that's why I chose that weight, so that I'd brew a perfect cup. So if you, as you play around with it and know the size of your cups, you'll get to know like, oh, I've got 3 people having coffee. I'm going to do a Chemex and I need 750 grams of water. Divide by 17, I've got my coffee weight. After you've gone through it a few times, it just sort of becomes routine, and it's something you won't even have to think about. Quickly, I'll talk about the Chemex, because it's a very similar principle. You've got the cone coming to a point. Now the difference is a Chemex filter is actually a big flat circle that we quarter to make our filter. So you can see one side has 1 ply and one side ends up with 3 plies. So there's a few reasons for that, but one of the main reason is you have your spout here. If you always want to put your 3 ply on the spout side. If you flip this around, what happens is as the water hits and this gets less structure because it's wet and the weight of the coffee, you can kind of plug your spout, and you actually want that spout to be left open. So you put your 3 ply on that side, and again you would pre-wet, preheat everything. And then beyond that, it's the same as what I just did, except that the vessel is a one piece. So when you're done, you lift this out and you don't need to decant it into something else. It's already in. And this is a great way to make multiple cups of coffee that's a very similar flavor profile to a V60. V60, it's fairly hard to make more than 2 cups of coffee. So we'll give it a quick taste. And also a quick note on temperature. You shouldn't be brewing with boiling water. What I like to do is bring it to a boil and then wait between 30 seconds and a minute for the water just to settle and come down from that 100 degrees Celsius a little bit. You definitely don't need to be brewing with scald, like boiling 100-degree water. Okay, so next is we're going to talk about an automatic filter machine. Like I said, the fundamentals of this machine are very similar to what we just did as a pour over a V60. It's a conical paper filter. It's boiling water through a bed of ground coffee. So at the end of the day, it's very similar. This will give you a lot of consistency because the water, the higher quality the machine, the more consistent the temperature and the flow rates are. So one thing I like about these machines is you know you're getting the same thing every time. You're getting consistent temperature, consistent water flow, which should lead to consistent results. So I have pre-weighed my coffee and my water. And as you can see on the side of the tank, this has delineations. What I would do is, as you're learning your new machine, if you've just got one of these machines, start out by weighing your water and seeing where it hits, because these numbers don't always equate to true measurements. They're not necessarily a cup in the sense of a baker's measuring cup. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. So it's good. I just weighed this water on a scale to the amount I want to brew. And what I would do if this were my new home brewer, I'd pour this in and say, okay, I know when I have 700 grams of water, it goes to the 6. So when I'm at the 6, I need 40 grams of ground coffee. So again, I'm always working with that 17-to-1 ratio. And then if you're brewing consistently the same volume all the time, you'll just kind of know what your weight is. And if you need to brew a different volume because you have more people coming by or something, you just weigh it that time if it's one you've never played around with before. So we'll start with our 40 grams of coffee, and I'll just show again our brew fundamentals. What I did is I pull this out and I pre-wet this filter. So this has already been pre-wetted, pre-warmed. Coffee goes in, and if you can, you want to try and have a nice level bed of coffee, so it's good just to kind of level it out. That way you're not getting a mound on one side where the water's having to pass through more coffee on one side and less on the other, so everything's extracting evenly. Close this. Water in. If you're in Victoria, we have great tap water for brewing coffee. Some places, if the water's hard or whatnot, you may need to manipulate your water a bit, whether it's with a filter or water treatment. But we're really fortunate here in Victoria that our water is just great right out of the tap. So I've got my ratio set, 17-to-1, so I'm ready to start brewing. And it's as simple as that, one button. So you just saw how we brewed this, and it's come through. It's all finished now. Reservoir's empty. We'll give it a quick taste. And I mean, ideally, it should taste a lot like what we brewed on the V60. And it does. It tastes really similar. Temperature is slightly higher than what I brewed because this machine will have its own internal temperature, but it is not scalding hot. It's drinkable basically right away. You might have to sip the first few while it cools in the cup, but you'll notice that it's not boiling water coming out. Same as what I was saying with your pour over. So there's lots of variations to these drip brewers. This is the one we just brewed on. You can spend a small amount of money or you know, up to, you get into some very fancy machines. This is an example of a higher end machine. So there's a lot more metal and glass on this as opposed to plastic. And this brewer, the whole point, this is called a ratio brewer. The whole point of ratio was they wanted machines that were aesthetically beautiful, brewed really high quality coffee with one button, one touch. So it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles, but what this brewer does that other brewers don't is it will adjust your flow rate based on how much water. So when you pour in your water to start brewing, it senses how much water there is, and if you're just doing a tiny amount, it slows it down so that it's not just blasting through a single cup of coffee. And then a larger amount, it will speed up that flow rate so that it's not taking too long on the flip side. Other advantages you get with the sort of the higher end you go are better temperature stability and more consistent flow rate, or in this case, a really customized flow rate. But you're not setting it, the machine does it all for you. It's literally weight of coffee in, weight of water in, one button. We're going to talk a little bit about choices of coffee. We've been brewing our Fernwood blend, which is medium. This is, I like to call this kind of our jack of all trades coffee, because what it truly is 2/3 medium and then 1/3 slightly darker, and it's blended after roasting. So if you were to look at the beans, you'll see a slight variation. Basically, every third bean is going to be a little darker. And the reason we've done that is that this is a great coffee. If you were brewing coffee for 6 people, rather than having to brew 6 different types of coffee, or you brew this and the person who likes black coffee is going to find this delicious. It's not too bitter. The acidity and the sort of subtleties of this coffee still come through because it's mostly medium. That 1/3 dark gives it a bit more robustness and a little bitterness in the aftertaste, so that it can also stand up to cream and sugar. You know, a really light coffee with a bunch of cream and sugar, you're just going to really taste cream and sugar. So in our range, the darker roast you go, we have a dark roast, we have a very dark roast. Those coffees, I would say, are great if you're a person who drinks lots of dairy, lots of creamer, lots of sugar in your coffee, because they're going to balance it and make a really nice, strong tasting cup of coffee, where that bitterness will counteract the sweetness and balance it, and it'll still taste like coffee. The lighter you go, you know, if you like black coffee, I would say go to the lighter roast, the better. So in our case, for our core line, these white bags, the Fernwood blend, or our 1976 espresso is actually also similar shade to this. It's a bit lighter. Works great as filter coffee as well. And again, is one that I would recommend if you're doing it as filter coffee. It's great for a black cup of coffee. Outside of that, when you see espresso blend, whether it's ours or another roaster, there is no difference really in what you're doing. You can brew espresso blend as filter coffee. You can brew filter coffee as espresso. When a roaster says something is an espresso blend, it's a blend that they have tailored to taste good as espresso, in their opinion. And you know, they may do something different in how they roast their espresso, like airflow or whatnot, but all of that is just to steer it towards tasting good in that brew method. But there's no rules. This Fernwood blend makes great espresso. And like I said, our 1976 espresso makes great filter coffee. So there's really no rules in that regard. You can kind of play around with it. Outside of, do not put dark, oily coffees in fully automatic espresso machines where the grinder is built in, because they will gum it up and jam it up. So we're also going to try brewing the coffee we've been tasting on this Jura machine. Being that I spend most of my time in coffee bars with giant commercial espresso machines, I don't have a lot of experience with these fully automatic, or they're often called super automatic machines, where their grinder's built in internally. But the few times I have tried these machines, I've been really pleasantly surprised. So we're going to try that again and see how it is. This machine, you don't have to think so much about ratios that I was trying to drill into earlier in the video, because this machine does all that on its own. And if this is sort of a hybrid of coffee and espresso, the ratio could be very different than your 17:1. But the machine will do that for you. You don't really need to worry about that. Just a little side note about ratios again. So I'm going to try the long pull, just because that's often the style of espresso we're pulling on our espresso machines. We pull our shots a little bit longer. So one touch is currently grinding. And so you're getting a look similar to espresso, where you have the CO2 bubbles forming on top, forming what we call crema, which is a component to the flavor of espresso. And often a good indicator of nice crema is it almost settles, like when you see the cascade of Guinness, a really good shot of espresso will settle in a similar way. You can see it kind of doing that here. So we'll just let it settle for a second longer, and you can see the cascade as it gets darker at the bottom. So I like to stir or swirl, in this case, my espresso, to just kind of integrate the crema into the coffee a bit more. So that's milder than the filter coffee that we brewed earlier, but the acidity is really coming through nicely, and it's brewed a very nice kind of, I would compare this to an Americano at a cafe. So again, my name's Ben from Fernwood Coffee. I've had a great time here at Cook Culture showing you different brew methods. If you have any other questions or you want to see those brew fundamentals that I talked about, you can go to fernwoodcoffee.com. We have our brew guides, which start out with the fundamentals, show you a few different brew methods, and including some we didn't talk about today. And then you can also purchase any of the coffees that we talked about today on the site. And if you have questions, you can either throw them in the comments here, and Cook Culture can forward them to me, or you can go through the contact form on our website.